It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the rain was hammering against the windows of my daughter-in-law's house in Newton. Inside, the kitchen felt warm and cozy. I was wiping down the granite counter, making peanut butter sandwiches, while upstairs I could hear Simone singing "The Wheels on the Bus" to my grandson. It sounded like a perfect family moment. But on the counter, Simone's laptop sat open, pulsing with a soft blue light. I wasn't trying to snoop. I was just moving a plate. But then I saw the File tab at the bottom of the screen. It didn't say budget or schedule. It said Project Dolores. My hand froze. The water was running upstairs. I had maybe 90 seconds before she came back down. I touched the trackpad. I didn't find a diary entry. I found a military-style spreadsheet. Phase 1, confidence erosion. Phase 2, financial extraction. Phase 3, total severance. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't mother-in-law drama. It was a documented, phased operation to bleed me dry and then erase me from my family like a tumor. It all started with a barbecue, or at least, that's when I finally allowed myself to see what had been happening all along. But the truth? The truth started years earlier, on a beautiful spring day when my son, Rowan, brought home a woman who smiled with her mouth but never, ever with her eyes. I should have known then. I should have trusted that prickle on the back of my neck when she shook my hand and assessed my living room like she was pricing it for an estate sale. But mothers never want to believe the worst about the people their children love, and that blindness almost destroyed me. To understand why it hurt so much, you have to understand what came before. 19 years ago, I sat in a cramped kitchen in Somerville at 2 a.m, still wearing my waitress uniform because I hadn't had time to change, smelling of diner coffee and grease. Rowan, my 14-year-old son, lay on the couch with a fever that terrified me. The thermometer read 103 degrees, and the walk-in clinic wouldn't open until 8. I had already spent the grocery money on his school books the week before, so the emergency room wasn't an option unless he stopped breathing. So I sat beside him all night with a bowl of cold water and a stack of washcloths, laying them across his forehead, humming the songs my own mother used to hum to me, and watching his chest rise and fall with each breath. By the time the gray morning light started creeping through the windows, the fever had finally broken, and I hadn't slept an inch because all I ever needed was for him to be okay. That's who I was. That's who I'd always been. The mother who gave everything and never kept score. I raised Rowan alone after his father walked out on us when he was 3, leaving nothing but a pile of unpaid bills and a hole in the wall where he'd thrown a lamp. I worked double shifts at diners all over Boston so he could have new shoes when he needed them. And I sat through every parent-teacher conference, even when I had to leave work early and lose the tips. I showed up to every school play and every football game, even the ones where he warmed the bench the whole time and never got to play, because I wanted him to look up into the stands and see me there. I gave him everything I had, and I never made him feel guilty for it. I never held any of it over his head like some parents do, because that's not what love looks like. Love is a gift, not a loan. Then Rowan met Simone. She was beautiful in that careful, polished way that some women are, the kind of woman who could wear white to a picnic and somehow not get a single stain on it. She worked in marketing for a tech company in Cambridge, and she talked about personal brands, strategic messaging, and influencer campaigns. I didn't understand half of what she said, but I could see she was smart. She was ambitious, and she was driven in a way that Rowan, sweet, gentle Rowan, never was. I liked her at first. I really did. I thought she was good for my son because I thought she'd push him to be better, reach higher, and want more from life. I thought she'd make him happy. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't discover until it was almost too late, was that Simone had been studying me long before we ever met. She'd been asking Rowan, careful questions about our relationship for 6 months before she ever shook my hand. She had been taking notes, building a psychological profile, and figuring out exactly how to play the devoted mother card against me. The wedding was lovely, though it cost more than I made in 3 years. I paid for half of it, even though it meant cleaning out my savings account and working extra shifts for 3 months straight. Simone thanked me in her speech at the reception, calling me the best mother-in-law a woman could ask for, while looking right at me with tears in her eyes. Everyone clapped, and I cried happy tears into my napkin, feeling so grateful that my son had found someone who appreciated the bond we had. 3 years later, Ellie was born. I was there in the delivery room at Mass General Hospital, holding Simone's hand through the contractions, while Rowan paced nervously in the corner. When the doctor offered to let me cut the umbilical cord, I cried again. The first time I held my granddaughter in my arms, I looked over at Rowan and saw him as a baby again, and I felt like everything I'd gone through, all the sacrifice, all the struggle, and all those years of working myself to exhaustion had been leading to this moment. The circle was completing itself. I started babysitting 3 days a week so Simone could go back to work. I changed diapers, did midnight feedings, and sang the same lullabies I'd sung to Rowan when he was tiny. When Max came along 2 years later, I did it all over again with the same joy. Those were genuinely the best years of my life. Coming over to their house in Newton and finding Ellie and Max waiting for me, seeing their toys scattered across my living room floor, and hearing their laughter fill up all the spaces in my house that had been silent for too long, it was everything I had ever wanted. But there was something I didn't notice during those golden years. Something so subtle, I only caught it months later when I went back through old photos, trying to understand what had happened to us. In every single picture from Max's first year, every birthday party, every holiday, every random Sunday afternoon, Simone was watching me. She wasn't looking at the baby she was holding, and she wasn't smiling at Rowan. She wasn't posing for the camera like everyone else. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read at the time, a look of calculation and assessment. Now I know exactly what that expression was. She was studying me. She was waiting for the right moment, and she was getting ready to make her move. The changes started so small I almost didn't notice them, like a hairline fracture in a windshield that spreads inch by inch until the whole thing shatters. One afternoon, Simone asked me very sweetly if I could try not to give the kids sugar right before dinner because it was making bedtime difficult. That seemed reasonable, so I agreed immediately. A few weeks later, she asked me not to let them watch certain shows because she was trying to limit their screen time and curate their media consumption. That also seemed fine, so I went along with it. Even though the shows were harmless cartoons, Rowan had watched at that age. Then one day, she mentioned that it would be helpful if I could text before coming over. That even though I'd had a key to their house for 3 years and had been dropping by unannounced the whole time to bring leftovers or help with laundry. I told myself she was just being a protective mother and that boundaries were healthy. I told myself I should respect her parenting choices because they were her children and not mine. So I started texting before every visit. I asked permission before giving the kids snacks, and I followed every single rule she made without questioning any of them. And the rules kept multiplying like weeds in a garden. Don't talk about religion around the children because they want to let them choose for themselves later. Don't mention anything political because it's too divisive. Don't tell stories about when Rowan was young because it infantilizes him and makes him uncomfortable. Don't compare how things used to be with how they are now because it sounds judgmental. Don't use the wrong pronouns for their stuffed animals because you need to respect their pretend play. Do not, and do not. Each new rule came wrapped in a smile and delivered with concern for the children's well-being. Each one was phrased using language that sounded like it came straight from a therapist's office or a parenting self-help book. Words like agency, autonomy, and generational trauma. It was so reasonable, so measured, and so impossible to argue against without sounding like you were the unreasonable one. But underneath every boundary was the same message being hammered into me over and over again. I was doing something wrong. I was too much. I was too involved. I was too old-fashioned. I was too stuck in my outdated ways of thinking. I needed to change. I needed to do better, and I needed to ask permission for everything. I started walking on eggshells every time I was around my own grandchildren. I'd monitor every word before it came out of my mouth, terrified I would accidentally say something that violated a rule I didn't even know existed. I'd watch Simone's face constantly, looking for signs of approval or disapproval before I'd hug Ellie or pick up Max. I turned myself into a nervous, apologetic version of who I used to be, shrinking smaller and smaller to fit into the box she had built for me. What I didn't understand back then, what I couldn't possibly have known, was that every single one of those rules had been carefully calculated and deliberately timed. She wasn't trying to make me a better grandmother. No, she was trying to make me uncomfortable. She was making the relationship so difficult, so fraught with anxiety, that I would eventually pull away on my own. But I didn't pull away. Instead, I doubled down and tried harder. And that's when she realized she would have to escalate. 3 months before everything exploded, I was babysitting while Simone ran upstairs to change Max out of his juice-stained shirt. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Rain was pouring heavily against the windows, and the house felt cozy and warm. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen granite counter. The screen hadn't gone to sleep yet. It was glowing with a spreadsheet that looked complicated and boring. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally. I was just clearing the counter to make peanut butter sandwiches for the kids when my eye caught the text on the tab at the bottom of the screen. Project Dolores. My hands froze halfway to the cutting board. Project Dolores? It looked like a work file, like I was a client, like I was a problem that needed managing or a building that needed renovating. I glanced toward the stairs and heard water running in the bathroom upstairs and Simone's voice singing "The Wheels on the Bus" to Max to keep him calm. I had maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3. My finger hovered over the trackpad. Everything in me knew I shouldn't look. I knew that privacy was one of Simone's biggest rules, and that if she caught me, I would be banned from the house forever. I knew that whatever was in that file, I didn't want to see it, that once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. But my name was right there. My name labeled like a project file in some corporate presentation. I clicked. The first document opened. It wasn't just a spreadsheet. It was a master plan. My eyes scanned the screen, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. There were dates, timelines, and categories marked complete, in progress, and upcoming. My vision started to blur at the edges. I had to read some lines 3 times before my brain would accept what they said. Phase 1, boundary establishment and confidence erosion. The status was complete, and the notes, subject is compliant but persistent. Guilt tactics regarding the son's upbringing are effective. Continue to emphasize modern parenting clashes. Phase 2, access restriction. Status in progress. Target, reduce unsupervised visits to 0 by October. Implement appointment-only rule for drop-ins. Phase 3, the extraction. Status upcoming. Objective, full severance of the relationship. Trigger event needed. See, holiday stress or financial dispute. They had a plan for me, a detailed, systematic plan, and according to the timestamps, whatever they were doing, I was already deep into the middle of it. I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy thuds. She was coming back. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady enough to photograph the screen. 1 shot, 2, and 3. I didn't even look at what I was capturing. I just kept hitting the button, desperate to document whatever this was before she came back down and caught me. The footsteps got closer. I hit send, uploading everything to my cloud drive, and then I closed the laptop just as the doorknob turned. I picked up the knife and started cutting carrots like my hands weren't shaking, like my whole world hadn't just tilted sideways. Simone appeared in the doorway with Max on her hip and smiled at me with that perfect wow and practice smile. "Thanks so much for watching him, Dolores. You're the best." I smiled back. Somehow, I forced my lips to curve upward, and I went back to making sandwiches while my mind screamed with questions I couldn't ask. What had I just seen? What were they planning? And how long had this been happening without me knowing? I wouldn't look at those photos until later that night. And I also wouldn't sit down to really read through everything I'd captured until I was safely locked in my own house. Because some part of me already knew that once I did, there would be no going back. Once I understood what those documents meant, I'd have to make a choice. To keep pretending or to fight back. But that afternoon, while I made peanut butter sandwiches in my daughter-in-law's kitchen and listened to my grandson chatter about his toy trucks, I didn't realize that the manual I was holding was meant for my own elimination. All I knew was that something felt very, very wrong. The barbecue was when everything finally came crashing down. It was the trigger event Simone had been waiting for, or perhaps the one she manufactured. I'd spent the entire morning of that Saturday in September preparing for it. I made burgers and hot dogs from scratch, grinding the meat myself because Rowan liked it that way. I made my famous potato salad that takes 3 hours because you have to boil and peel and chop everything by hand. I made a chocolate cake that took 4 hours total because I wanted to spell out Ellie's name in pink icing letters, and I had to do it perfectly, letter by letter, with a pastry bag. By the time people started arriving at my house in Cambridge, I was exhausted but happy. My backyard was full of neighbors and their kids. There was music playing from the portable speaker. There was laughter. And there was golden afternoon September light filtering through the trees and making everything look warm and perfect. Ellie was running in circles through the grass with the other children, her purple dress flying out behind her like a cape. Max was clinging to my leg the way he always did when he was feeling shy around people. I bent down next to him to ask if he wanted to try some dessert because I'd made his favorite kind of cake. Before I could even get the words out, Simone was already there. She appeared beside us so fast it actually made me flinch. Her hand came down on Max's shoulder, not hard, but firm and controlling. She told him in this sweet voice that he'd been having tummy trouble lately and probably shouldn't have any more sugar today. "Too much sugar," she said, looking directly at me. "We need to be more careful, Dolores." I watched Max's little face fall. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but then he looked up at his mother, and that look on her face made him go silent. He just nodded with his eyes dropping down to his shoes. Something cold slid down my spine like ice water. It wasn't about the sugar. It was more about the control and about stopping me from giving him joy. Then Simone squeezed my arm, just a little too hard to be friendly. Her voice got louder and pitched so that Carol and the other neighbors standing nearby could hear every word. "We all need to be more careful about what the children are exposed to," she said. "About being mindful, about protecting them." The words themselves sounded reasonable, but the way she said them, as though she was performing for an audience, implying that I had been exposing them to danger, made my stomach turn. I looked past her at Rowan. He was standing by the grill with his shoulders hunched forward, flipping burgers mechanically. He wouldn't look at me. He was just staring down at the grill like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. He knew what she was doing, and he was letting it happen. Simone's voice pulled me back. She was talking now about how they should probably wrap things up early because Max was getting overstimulated and Ellie needed to wind down before bedtime. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't her asking my opinion. It was an announcement that my party was ending early whether I liked it or not. I glanced over at the picnic table, at the chocolate cake I'd spent 4 hours making, at Ellie's name spelled out perfectly in pink icing. Nobody had even cut into it yet. Nobody had taken a single slice. I excused myself and went inside the house to refill the lemonade pitcher, just to get away from Simone's performance for a minute. Through the kitchen window, I could see Rowan and Simone standing together by the fence at the edge of the yard. Their heads were bent close together, like they were having an intense private conversation in the middle of my party. I moved closer to the screen door where I could hear them better. Simone's voice carried clearly across the yard. It was sharp and cold, nothing like the sweet voice she'd been using in front of everyone else. If she makes one more comment about how we parent, Rowan, we are done. I mean it. One more comment and they don't come back here for a month. I heard Rowan mumble something about how I was just trying to help, that I didn't mean anything by it. She cut him off before he could finish. She is controlling. She constantly undermines me. She acts like she owns you just because she raised you by herself, and she thinks that ownership extends to our children too. Then she said something that made my blood freeze in my veins. We're right on schedule. Phase 1 wraps up today. Tomorrow we start the extraction. The words didn't make sense to me at first. Phase 1, extraction. They sounded like military terms or something from a business strategy meeting, but the way she said them, flat and cold and businesslike, made my hands start shaking. Rowan asked her what she meant by extraction. Simone laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was cold and calculated. You'll see, she said. Just trust the process. The lemonade pitcher suddenly slipped from my grip. The liquid sloshed over the rim and splashed onto the kitchen counter, soaking the towel I had laid out. I grabbed another towel and wiped it up with trembling hands, then forced myself to go back outside, wearing a smile that felt like a mask made of plaster. The rest of the afternoon crawled by in slow motion. I made small talk with neighbors who didn't know anything was wrong. I laughed at jokes I didn't hear. Ellie came up to me twice and asked if I was mad at her. I told her never. I could never be mad at her, but my voice cracked when I said it. As the sun started bleeding orange across the sky, guests began packing up their folding chairs and heading home. Simone gathered Ellie and Max with this bright, performative energy. She told them to thank Grandma for the beautiful day. Wasn't it such a beautiful day? She chirped. Say thank you to Grandma. I knelt down to their level. Ellie hugged me, but it was lighter than usual. Briefer. Something was off, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Then Max leaned in to kiss my cheek and whispered something that made my heart stop beating for a second. Mommy says you get sad when we're loud. Before I could ask him what he meant, before I could even process what he just said, Simone was already guiding both children toward the car. She was saying something about being in touch soon and giving everyone space. Rowan wouldn't meet my eyes at all. He just followed behind his family like a zombie. Right before Simone got into the passenger seat of the car, she turned back toward me one last time. Her face was pleasant, almost kind, the perfect mask of a loving daughter-in-law. But her eyes were completely flat, empty, and dead behind the performance. She mouthed 2 words at me, making sure I saw them clearly. Stay back. Then she waved cheerfully at the neighbors who were still lingering in the driveway, climbed into the car, and closed the door. The engine started, and the taillights glowed red in the fading light. I stood on my porch with my fingers gripping the railing so hard they hurt, watching the car disappear around the corner. Carol from 3 doors down walked past me carrying a folding chair under her arm. She told me what a wonderful grandmother I was and how lucky those kids were to have me. I tried to smile at her, but my face wouldn't move properly. I went inside and locked the front door behind me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Rowan had just come through. "We need space. Don't reach out for a while. We'll contact you when ready." My phone buzzed again immediately. A Facebook notification. Simone had just posted a photo from the barbecue. It was a shot of Ellie and Max laughing together. You could see my chocolate cake in the background, the pink icing catching the golden sunlight. Everything looked perfect and warm and happy. The caption read, "Blessed beyond measure, teaching my kids about healthy boundaries and self-respect. Some lessons are hard, but love means protecting your peace." The post already had 43 likes. The top comment was from Simone's sister. "You're such a strong mom. Some people never learn." But there was another comment further down that caught my attention and made me screenshot everything immediately. It was from someone named Miriam Hayes, someone I'd never heard of before. I recognized this pattern. If the grandmother in this story needs help, tell her to find me. I've been there. There's a way out. I set the phone down on the counter. The house was completely silent around me. Next to my phone sat the chocolate cake, Ellie's favorite kind. "We love you, Grandma," was written out in perfect pink icing letters. I'd spent 4 hours making it that morning, measuring and mixing and piping each letter with such care. Nobody had taken a single slice. I stood there in my empty kitchen, surrounded by half-eaten potato salad and dirty paper plates, and I realized something that would haunt me for weeks afterward. Somewhere along the way, without me even noticing it happening, my grandchildren had suddenly been taught to be afraid of me, and I'd never even seen it coming. The days after the barbecue didn't just pass. They stretched into weeks like taffy being pulled until it snaps. My phone sat on the kitchen counter like an unexploded bomb that was refusing to detonate, silent and accusing. Every text I sent to Rowan, simple things like, "Did you get home okay?" or "I made extra lasagna if you want to swing by," came back marked as read. Those blue check marks mocked me from the screen. They had seen my messages. They were looking right at them, and they were choosing, actively and deliberately, not to respond. I busied myself with tasks I'd already done. I scrubbed the grout in the bathroom until my knuckles were raw. I baked loaves of banana bread that nobody would eat, filling the freezer until there was no room left. I watered my houseplants until the soil turned to mud and the leaves yellowed from too much care. But the silence from Rowan and Simone was somehow louder than any argument we'd ever had. It was a physical weight in the house, pressing against the windows and filling the hallways. I would wake up at 3 a.m, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and reach for my phone in the darkness. I'd scroll through old photos until my eyes burned and blurred. There was Ellie taking her first steps in my living room, her chubby hands gripping my fingers for balance. There was Max on his 3rd birthday with blue frosting smeared across his cheek, laughing so hard he got the hiccups. There was Rowan as a gangly teenager, rolling his eyes at me but grinning when I embarrassed him in front of his friends. The photos were all still there in my camera roll, bright and colorful evidence that I had mattered. But the people in them felt like ghosts now. It felt like they had died and been replaced by strangers who looked exactly like them, but had no memory of who I was. 2 weeks after the barbecue, my phone finally buzzed with something other than a spam call about my car warranty. My heart jumped into my throat, fluttering with a desperate, pathetic hope. But it was just a Facebook notification. "You have a memory to look back on today." I clicked on it with shaking fingers. It was from Ellie's 7th birthday party, exactly 1 year ago. She was wearing the purple dress I'd bought her, standing in front of a unicorn cake with her eyes squeezed shut tight as she made a wish. I was standing right behind her with my hands on her little shoulders, anchoring her. Both of us were grinning at the camera like we didn't have a care in the world. The caption Simone had written back then said, "Best grandma ever. We're so blessed." I stared at that photo until my vision went blurry. Then I noticed the date on a new post that had appeared below it in my feed. Today's date. I scrolled down with a feeling of cold dread building in my stomach, like I had swallowed a stone. There it was, posted just 3 hours earlier. Ellie was wearing a different purple dress, standing in front of a different cake. This one was shaped like a castle with pink towers. Simone and Rowan were on either side of her, the perfect nuclear family. Max was holding a balloon. Everyone in the photo was smiling. Everyone except me, because I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't at the party. I hadn't even been invited to my own granddaughter's 8th birthday. The caption read, 8 years of pure magic. Small celebration with the people who matter most. Grateful for healthy boundaries and intentional love. The people who matter most. The phrase cut through me like a knife. The post already had 56 likes and dozens of comments. Heart emojis. Congratulations. She's getting so big. Great job, Mama. But one comment stood out from all the others. It was from Miriam Hayes again, the same woman who'd commented on the barbecue post weeks ago. Beautiful family. I'm sure everyone who loves Ellie is celebrating today. It was subtle, but it was pointed. I set the phone down on the counter before I threw it against the wall. Then I picked it back up and called Rowan's number. It went straight to voicemail. I called again, voicemail again. Then I sent a text with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. It's Ellie's birthday. You didn't invite me. The message showed as read within 30 seconds, but there was no response. Just those blue check marks staring back at me like dead eyes. I grabbed my car keys off the hook by the door. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't sit in that silent house for one more second. 20 minutes later, I was pulling up outside their house in Newton. The driveway was completely full. Simone's silver sedan was there, parked next to Rowan's truck. Her mother's car, a beige Lexus I recognized from the wedding, was parked on the street. There were balloons tied to the mailbox, pink and purple ones floating lazily in the breeze. Streamers were stretched across the front porch. I sat in my car in front of their house for 5 full minutes, my engine idling, and my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my joints ached. I was trying to work up the courage to walk up to that door and knock. I was trying to decide if I was brave enough, desperate enough, or angry enough to face whatever was waiting for me on the other side. Finally, I opened the car door and got out. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through water. I made it halfway up their driveway before I saw them. They were sitting on the front porch, stacked in a neat, dismissive pile right beside the door. 3 wrapped presents. The corners of the wrapping paper were already curling and fading from sitting in the sun. The gift tags were facing up toward the sky, and I could see my own handwriting on them from where I stood. To Ellie, love Grandma. I'd dropped those presents off 4 days earlier when nobody was home. I'd left them by the door with a cheerful note telling her how much I loved her and hoping she'd have the most wonderful birthday. They'd been sitting there on the porch ever since, completely unopened, through rain showers, through the heat of the sun, through 4 full days of people walking past them, stepping over them, and choosing to ignore them. I stood there in their driveway staring at those 3 boxes, and I felt something crack open deep inside my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even sadness. It was something worse than both of those things combined. It was the realization of my own insignificance. I was being carefully and surgically eliminated from their lives. 1 day at a time. 1 ignored text message at a time. one unopened birthday present at a time. I walked back to my car on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. I got in, I started the engine, and I drove away from that house without looking back. But I didn't go straight home like I'd planned. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was divine intervention, or maybe it was just the universe throwing me a lifeline. But I pulled over at a coffee shop in Harvard Square. I opened the Facebook app on my phone, ignoring the photos of the party I missed, and I searched for Miriam Hayes. I found her profile on the first try, and I clicked message. "You commented on Simone's posts," I typed, my thumbs clumsy on the screen. "You said you recognized the pattern. I'm the grandmother in the story. I need help." I hit send. I sat there in the coffee shop parking lot staring at my phone screen, watching the battery percentage tick down. I didn't actually expect her to respond. It had been a desperate move by a desperate woman who was completely out of options. Her response came through in less than 60 seconds. "I've been waiting for you to reach out for months. I've been tracking Simone's social media for 8 months now, watching her do this to you. She's done this before, Dolores, to other grandmothers. Can you meet me tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. at Riverside Cafe? Come alone. And Dolores, start recording everything from now on. Every phone call, every conversation, and every text. You're going to need evidence of all of it." I sat in my car in that parking lot and whispered the truth out loud to the empty space around me. They're pretending I don't exist. And the worst part was knowing that tomorrow morning I'd wake up and check my phone again, still hoping, always hoping for something that was never coming. The next morning, I walked into Riverside Cafe at exactly 9:55 a.m. It was a cozy place that smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, but I was too nervous to appreciate it. Miriam Hayes was already sitting in the corner booth near the back, watching the door. She looked exactly like she did in her profile picture. Silver hair pulled back from her face in a neat, no-nonsense bun with sharp, clear eyes that seemed to see right through all the pretending I'd been doing. She was 72 years old, but she held herself like someone who'd stopped apologizing for taking up space a long time ago. She stood up when she saw me coming toward her. Her handshake was firm and steady, her skin cool and dry. "Dolores," she said. It wasn't a question. We ordered coffee from the waitress. Black for her, herbal tea for me because my stomach was rolling. And then Miriam leaned forward across the table with her elbows planted firmly on the formica. She looked at me for a long moment, assessing the dark circles under my eyes and the tremor in my hands. Then she told me something that made my breath catch in my throat. "You're not crazy, Dolores. You're not imagining any of this. And you are absolutely not alone in what's happening to you." The tears came before I could stop them. They just started pouring down my face right there in the middle of the cafe, embarrassing and hot. Miriam slid a box of tissues across the table toward me without saying anything. She didn't look away, and she didn't tell me to hush. She just waited patiently while I pulled myself together enough to breathe normally again. Then she started telling me her story. She told me about her daughter, Catherine, about the son-in-law who smiled and charmed everyone in public, but controlled and manipulated everything in private. She talked about the grandchildren she'd helped raise while her daughter worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat, about the diaper changes, the school pickups, and the shared secrets. Everything was fine until Catherine remarried a few years later. The new husband decided that Miriam's influence over the children was too strong. He said she was undermining their parenting. He said she needed to step back and give them space. The isolation started slowly, just like it had with me. Rules that kept changing. Access to the grandchildren that was dangled like a carrot and then pulled away whenever she did something they didn't approve of. This was my story. Almost word for word. I asked her how long it went on. 3 years, Miriam said, her voice hard. 3 years of pure hell. 2 years of fighting back through the legal system, and 1 year of peace since we reached our agreement. She reached into the large leather tote bag she'd brought with her and pulled out a thick folder. She opened it and spread the contents out on the table between our untouched drinks. Inside were dozens of documents, printed emails, screenshots of text message conversations with timestamps, bank statements with highlighted sections in neon yellow, and at the very back, a formal visitation agreement signed by a mediator, notarized and stamped with the seal of the court. This was what had saved her, she explained. Documentation, evidence, legal boundaries that were enforced by the court system, and the willingness to stop playing their game by their rules. I stared at all those papers spread out on the table between us. They looked so official and so final. So much more real than the desperate hope I'd been carrying around in my chest. She told me she'd recorded everything they'd said to her, every conversation where they threatened to cut off access, every time they dangled the grandchildren in front of her and then pulled them away at the last second, every instance of them making promises and then breaking them. Then she had taken all of that evidence to a family attorney who specialized in grandparents' rights. Grandparents' rights, I whispered. I didn't even know that was a real thing. Miriam was watching my face as I processed all of this new information. It exists in Massachusetts, she said. If you can prove beyond reasonable doubt that you had a significant pre-existing relationship with the children and that severing it would cause them harm. She pointed to the stack of papers. But you need more than feelings, Dolores. You need evidence they couldn't dispute or explain away. I asked her what kind of evidence. Recordings, she said. Screenshots. Names and contact information for witnesses who've seen how they treat you. Dates and times of every instance where they denied you access to the children. Documentation of every financial demand they've made and every rule they've ever imposed on you. She leaned in closer. You need to build an airtight case because when you finally stand up to them and fight back, they're going to come at you harder than you can possibly imagine right now. They will call you toxic. They will call you crazy. And they will try to destroy your reputation. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to clasp them together in my lap. I told her I didn't want to fight them. I told her I just wanted to see my grandchildren. That was all I'd ever wanted. Miriam's expression softened, but her voice stayed firm. I know that's all you want, but they've made this into a fight whether you wanted one or not. The question is no longer whether you're going to fight. The question is now whether you're going to keep losing or whether you're going to start protecting yourself. I thought about Ellie's stiff and brief hugs that didn't feel right anymore. About Max whispering that Mommy said I get sad when they're loud. About the unopened birthday presents rotting on the porch. And about the folder I'd found on Simone's laptop. The one labeled Project Dolores. I asked her what I should actually do. What were the concrete next steps? Miriam smiled at me, but it wasn't a warm and comforting smile. It was sharp and determined. The smile of a warrior who'd already been through the battle and come out the other side. First, you stop performing for them, she said. Stop trying to be the perfect grandmother who follows all their rules and never complains. Second, you document absolutely everything from this point forward. Third, you get a consultation with a lawyer who understands this kind of case. And fourth, you start communicating with them only in writing, email, or text, so there's always a permanent record of what was actually said. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a business card. I took it from her with trembling fingers. Gerald Pierce, family law specialist, an address in downtown Boston. Call him today, Miriam said. Tell him I sent you and that you need a consultation as soon as possible. He's going to know exactly what to do. I stared down at that card like it might explode in my hands. Miriam's voice got gentler, but she didn't back down from what she was saying. And Dolores, you need to stop apologizing. Stop asking permission to love your own grandchildren. You didn't do anything wrong here. You need to believe it deep in your bones because they're going to try very hard to convince you otherwise. I left that cafe with Gerald Pierce's business card tucked into my pocket and something dangerous starting to grow in my chest. It was hope, but not the desperate and pleading kind I'd been carrying around for months. This was different. This was hope that came with a plan. Hope that came with action steps. Hope that had teeth. 3 weeks and 2 days of complete silence passed before anything changed. I'd started keeping my phone in my hand constantly, just in case. I'd set up the voice recorder app days earlier after Miriam told me to document everything. I'd practiced opening it with one hand while talking and getting the motion smooth enough so that I could do it without looking. Just in case, so when my phone rang that Tuesday afternoon and Simone's name appeared on the screen, my thumb was already hovering over the record button even before I answered. Hello? I hit record as I said it. Smooth. Practiced. A motion I'd been preparing for without really believing I'd need it. Her voice came through warm and bright, like absolutely nothing had happened between us. Like the barbecue and the silent treatment and the unopened birthday presents had all been figments of my imagination. She missed me, she said. The kids missed me too. They'd been asking about me constantly. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime soon? Just the two of us. We could clear the air and talk things through like adults. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to demand answers for everything she'd put me through. But instead, I heard myself agreeing in this small, the grateful voice that I hated. My own voice was betraying me and revealing the desperation I was trying so hard to hide. I spent that entire night rehearsing what I was going to say to Simone. I practiced in front of the bathroom mirror. I wrote out talking points on index cards. I rehearsed how I'd stay calm and measured, how I'd ask for answers without sounding desperate or angry, and how I'd advocate for myself without making her defensive. But the next morning, when I walked into that coffee shop near Faneuil Hall and saw Simone sitting at the corner table with her laptop open and papers spread out in front of her like she was about to chair a business meeting, every single word I'd rehearsed just evaporated from my brain. She stood up when she saw me coming. She hugged me with the kind of hug you give to someone you're tolerating, rather than someone you actually care about. Stiff shoulders, patting my back like I was a child. Then she told me I looked tired and asked if I'd been sleeping okay. I had dark circles under my eyes from 3 solid weeks of waking up at 3 a.m. in a panic. But I smiled at her and said I was fine. Everything was fine. We sat down across from each other. She ordered a latte. I ordered tea that I knew I wouldn't be able to drink because my stomach was in knots. She folded her hands on the table in front of her like a therapist getting ready to deliver a diagnosis. Then she told me that we needed to establish some ground rules going forward. For everyone's sake, she said. Just some basic ground rules so we could all feel comfortable and safe. I nodded, with my throat feeling like I'd swallowed sandpaper and totally incapable of forming words. She reached into her folder and slid a piece of paper across the table toward me. It was typed and formatted with bullet points, a formal list printed on thick, expensive paper. She said these were just some topics she'd like me to avoid when I was around the children. She framed it as a helpful guide, like she was doing me a favor by spelling everything out so clearly. I stared down at the paper, with my eyes skimming over the words without really processing them at first. No talking about religion, because they wanted to let the children choose their own beliefs when they were older. No giving the kids sugar without explicit permission first. No comments about their screen time or technology use. No political discussions of any kind. No stories about how things used to be when Rowan was young. No undermining their parenting choices in any way. The list went on and on. 12 separate rules, each one boxing in my relationship with my own grandchildren a little bit more. I heard myself say that it seemed like a lot, and that it felt kind of extreme. Simone smiled at me with this patient expression, like she was explaining something simple to a child who wasn't quite keeping up. She said it was just about boundaries, that healthy families have boundaries, and that this is what healthy relationships look like. Then she said something that made me incredibly grateful I'd hit that record button before walking into the coffee shop. "These aren't optional suggestions, Dolores," she said softly. "They're requirements. If you can't follow these guidelines, we'll have to reassess whether you should have access to the children at all. It's all about their safety." Their safety. She said it so casually, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like I was some kind of danger to my own grandchildren. Like I was a threat that needed to be managed and controlled. I felt my hands starting to shake under the table where she couldn't see them. I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to grab that piece of paper and rip it into tiny pieces right in front of her face. Instead, I just nodded and said I understood. I'd do my best to follow her rules. She looked satisfied with that answer and tucked the list back into her folder. Then she said there was one more thing she wanted to discuss while we were here together. She pulled out her phone and opened her banking app. She turned the screen toward me so I could see it clearly. She started explaining that the kids' new school in Newton had a fundraiser coming up. They were stretched pretty thin this month because Rowan's truck had needed some expensive repairs, but she knew I would want to contribute to the fundraiser because I cared about the children's education. It wasn't phrased as a question, it was stated as a fact. Of course, I'd want to contribute. What grandmother wouldn't? I asked how much she was thinking. She said $2,000 would be wonderful. It would really show the kids that family members support each other, that we're all in this together. $2,000. I stared at the screen in shock. $2,000 was half my savings account, the account I'd been building for 5 years, $20 at a time from every paycheck. The account that was supposed to cover my hip replacement surgery. The one Dr. Chris said I'd need within the next 2 years. "You're going to need a new hip," the doctor had told me 6 months earlier. "The cartilage is almost gone. It's not an emergency yet, but you need to start planning financially. With your insurance, you're looking at about $4,000 out of pocket." I'd been so proud when I'd saved up $2,000. Halfway there, halfway to being able to walk without pain again. Then Simone said something that made every single puzzle piece click into place in my mind. "Think of it as an investment in your relationship with them, Dolores," she said, tapping her fingernail on the table. "The more you show that you're committed and willing to support this family, the more access you'll earn back." Earn. She used the word earn, like my love had to be purchased. Like being a grandmother was a privilege I had to buy my way into. Like my grandchildren were a product I could only access if I paid the right price. I heard myself saying yes even before my brain fully caught up with what was happening. Yes, of course I'd transfer the money today. Whatever they needed, whatever would help. Her smile finally reached her eyes for the first time since I'd sat down. She told me I was amazing. This was exactly what they needed to move forward. A fresh start for everyone. A fresh start that I'd just purchased for $2,000 and my complete silence. We finished our coffee. She talked for another 20 minutes about the kids' activities and their grades and their new interests. All the things I used to know firsthand because I was part of their daily lives. Now I was getting updates like I was some distant relative who sends Christmas cards once a year. When we stood up to leave, she hugged me again. Tighter this time, like we had really bonded during our little chat. She told me she was so glad we'd done this, and that the kids were going to be absolutely thrilled to see me again soon. I drove home with that list of rules folded up in my purse and a bank transfer already scheduled on my phone. But I also drove home with something else. Something she didn't know about. A recording. 43 minutes of Simone explicitly linking money to access to my grandchildren. And 43 minutes of evidence that this wasn't really about healthy boundaries at all. It was about control, and it was about extortion. That evening, a text came through from Rowan. "Thanks for being so understanding, Mom. Come over on Saturday at 2 p.m. Don't be late. Don't be late." Like I was a service provider. Like I was the plumber coming to fix the sink. I sat on my couch staring at those words until my phone screen went dark. Then I did 3 things in quick succession. First, I opened my banking app and transferred $2,000 to Simone and Rowan's account. I watched the money disappear from my balance like water swirling down a drain. Now it was gone. Transferred to Simone's account for a school fundraiser I'd later discover didn't even exist. Second, I forwarded the recording of our coffee shop conversation to my own email address with the subject line, Evidence Number 1. And third, I sent a text message to Miriam Hayes. "You were right about everything. The coffee meeting, the rules, the money, all of it." Her response came back immediately, like she'd been waiting by her phone. "Good. You're learning. Now I need you to meet me again tomorrow morning. Same place, 10 a.m. Bring all your banking statements from the past 6 months. We need to document every single dollar they've taken from you. And Dolores, this is just the beginning. They're going to ask for more, much more than this." I opened my banking app one more time and stared at where the $2,000 had been just minutes before, the price of admission to my own grandchildren's lives. But this time was different. This time I wasn't just paying. I was building a case, brick by brick, recording by recording. I was documenting everything they were doing to me. And I was about to discover that $2,000 was just the down payment. Simone had a target number in mind, and she wasn't going to stop asking until she hit it. Miriam was right. They didn't stop. In fact, now that I had paid once, the floodgates opened. 3 weeks later, the dance costume request came in. "It's custom made," Simone had explained over text, attaching a photo of a flyer. "Hand sewn by a professional costume designer. All the other girls in the recital have custom costumes. We can't have Ellie be the only one in something store-bought. She'd be humiliated." $500. That was my grocery budget for 2 months. I stared at the text right in the middle of the aisle at Market Basket. I immediately put the roast beef back on the shelf and picked up the bologna. I put the name brand cereal back and bought the generic bag on the bottom shelf. And I stopped getting my blood pressure medication refilled because I could no longer afford the copay. I told myself it was fine, that Ellie's happiness was worth it. Then I transferred the money. I never saw the costume, but later heard she wore it once at a recital I wasn't invited to. Then came the soccer fees, $800. League registration, uniform, equipment, team photos, and end-of-season party contribution, Simone's text had listed out. "Max is so excited to play. He talks about it constantly. We just can't swing it this month with the car repairs." $800. I didn't have it. I looked around my bedroom trying to find something to sell. I opened my jewelry box and took out my mother's wedding ring. It was gold, simple, and worn thin from 50 years of marriage. I had hoped to give it to Ellie one day when she got married. I drove to a pawn shop in Dorchester. The man behind the counter didn't even look at me when he weighed it. $600, he grunted. I took the cash and made up the difference with a payday loan online. The interest rate was criminal, 400% APR, but I needed the money by Friday or Max wouldn't be able to play. I transferred the $800. Max played 3 games before they pulled him out of soccer. He wasn't into it anymore, Simone told me later. Then came the mortgage payment, $3,000. It's an emergency. Simone's voice on the phone had been frantic and breathless. Rowan's truck needs transmission work, and we're already behind on the mortgage. If we don't pay by Friday, we go into default, and our credit will be destroyed. Please, Dolores, we're desperate. $3,000. I went to my credit union. I took out a personal loan against my paid-off car. It was the only thing I owned outright, the only asset I had left. Now I had a lien on it and monthly payments I couldn't afford. But I paid it because I couldn't let my grandchildren lose their home. And the transmission? Fixed for $800, I found out later. The mortgage? Paid on time the month before the request. I saw the bank records during mediation. They'd never been behind, they just wanted the money. Every single time I hesitated or asked questions, access to my grandchildren would disappear. Sometimes for a week, sometimes for 2 weeks. The visits would be canceled with vague excuses about the kids being busy, tired, or sick. But every single time I paid what they asked for, I'd get a few hours with Ellie and Max. Always supervised, of course. Always with Simone hovering nearby like a prison guard, monitoring every word I said and every move I made. Never relaxed, never natural, and never the way it used to be. And through all of this, Simone kept posting on Facebook. She'd post photographs of Ellie wearing the dance costume I'd paid for, action shots of Max running across the soccer field in the uniform I'd bought, captions about how blessed they were and how important it was to surround your children with people who truly cared about them. The comments would pour in like always. Heart emojis everywhere. You're such a good mom. They're so lucky to have you. Your kids are beautiful. Nobody scrolling through Simone's Facebook feed had any idea that every single photograph had been purchased and that every moment of access came with a price tag attached to it. But I was documenting everything now. I printed out my banking statements and highlighted every single transfer to Simone and Rowan in yellow marker. I made notes next to each one about what they'd asked for and what reason they'd given. I saved every text message and kept every email. When I finally sat down and calculated the total amount, piece by piece, emergency by emergency, each one presented as a crisis, and each one tied to seeing my grandchildren, I had to check my math 3 times because I couldn't believe it. $18,000 in 4 months. My security, my safety net, the buffer between me and homelessness if anything went wrong. Gone. All of it. Used to purchase access to Ellie and Max like they were products I could only afford on a payment plan. I called Gerald Pierce's office and left a voicemail message. My voice was shaking so badly that I had to record it twice to make myself understood. By that evening, someone from his office called me back and scheduled a consultation for the following Wednesday at 2 p.m. I spent the next 3 days preparing for that meeting, like I was preparing for the most important exam of my life. I printed out text messages and put them in chronological order. I organized all my evidence by date. I wrote down every single instance where they denied me access to the children, every financial demand, every rule they'd imposed, and every time something they'd said or done had felt like control disguised as concern. By the time Wednesday arrived, I had a 3-inch binder full of documentation. I didn't drive straight to Gerald Pierce's office that Wednesday afternoon. I took the long route instead, down Memorial Drive along the Charles River, where Rowan and I used to take walks when he was little. This was where I'd brought him after his father left. After I'd sat him down in our cramped apartment and tried to explain why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore. He'd been 5 years old, too young to understand but old enough to hurt. We'd walked this exact path for hours that day, past the boathouses, past the college students, and past families having picnics on the grass, and I'd made him a promise. I told him we'd be okay, that we'd take care of each other, and that as long as we had love, we had everything we needed. Now I was parked along that same stretch of river, 25 years later, about to walk into a lawyer's office to formalize the fact that love hadn't been enough after all. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, a text from Simone. "The kids are asking about you today. Max made you the sweetest card at school. Maybe you could stop by this weekend? We could really use some help with the yard work too." Cheerful emoji. Help with the yard work? I stared at that message for a long time. At the cheerful emoji that felt like a slap, and at how easily she could ask me to come over and do physical labor in exchange for a few supervised hours with my own grandchildren. Across the river, I could see a grandmother walking with two small children. She was helping the little girl fly a kite, while the boy ran in circles around them, laughing. The grandmother's face was lit up with pure joy, uncomplicated and easy. Just the way it was supposed to be. That could have been me and Ellie and Max. It should have been me. I took a screenshot of Simone's message, added it to my evidence folder, started the car, and drove away from the river where I'd once promised my son that love would be enough. Gerald Pierce turned out to be a man in his mid-50s with kind eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd seen way too much family ugliness over the years to be shocked by anything anymore. He listened to my entire story without interrupting me once. He flipped through my 3-inch binder slowly and carefully, then asked pointed and specific questions that showed he was really paying attention. When I finally finished talking, he sat back in his leather office chair and looked at me for a very long moment. "Mrs. Carter," he finally said, his voice grave, "what you're describing isn't just emotional manipulation. What I'm looking at here is financial exploitation combined with parental alienation. They're using your grandchildren as leverage to extract money from you while simultaneously destroying your relationship with those children. This is serious." I asked him if there was anything I could actually do about it, if I had any legal options at all. He told me yes, absolutely yes. But I needed to understand what I'd be walking into if we moved forward. If we formalized boundaries through legal channels, Simone and Rowan were going to push back hard. Really hard. They would escalate before they'd comply. Was I prepared for that kind of fight? I thought about Max asking me why I was always sad, about birthday presents left unopened on the porch for days, about paying $2,000 just for the privilege of a few supervised hours with my grandchildren, about the 12-month plan I'd found on Simone's laptop, the plan to erase me completely from their lives. I told him yes, I was ready. He nodded slowly, like he'd been testing me with that question. "All right. Here's what we're going to do. We'll start by sending them a cease and desist letter regarding the financial exploitation. Then we'll file for grandparent visitation rights. Massachusetts law allows for that under certain circumstances, and you've got documentation showing that they're arbitrarily denying you access while simultaneously extracting money from you. That's a strong case." He paused and pulled out a legal pad to start taking notes. "We're also going to send them a formal notice that all future communication needs to be in writing. No more phone calls where things get said that can be twisted later. No more face-to-face conversations that can be recorded out of context and used against you. Everything goes through email or text from now on, so there's always a permanent record of what was actually said." I asked if he really thought that approach would work. "It shifts the power dynamic," he explained. "Right now, they control absolutely everything. This puts it on the record that you have rights too. It also creates documentation if they continue to deny you access arbitrarily. And if they want to play games with you, we make sure a referee is watching." I left his office that afternoon with a folder full of instructions and a timeline for what would happen next. The letters would be ready for my approval within 1 week. I drove home with my hands steady on the steering wheel for the first time in months. That evening, my phone rang. Simone's name appeared on the screen. I wanted to ignore it, but I knew I needed one last piece of evidence. I picked up the call, and I recorded the entire conversation, just like I'd been doing with everything now. Her tone was sugar sweet and casual. She was just checking in on me, she said. The kids missed me so much. Maybe I could come over this weekend? Saturday would be perfect. I told her that it would be nice. Then I said something I'd never said before. Could you send me the details in writing? I asked, just so I'd have everything clear. There was a pause on her end of the line, a beat too long. Why would you need that in writing? Her voice had changed slightly. The sweetness had a sharp edge underneath it now. Just for clarity, I said, keeping my voice neutral and calm, so I don't forget the time or get confused about the plans. Another pause. This one was even longer. I don't think that's really necessary, Dolores. It's just a casual family visit. I'd feel more comfortable having everything in writing going forward, I said, just to make sure we're all on the same page and there's no confusion. Her voice went flat, and the mask slipped completely. Are you trying to make this difficult? I kept my tone even and measured. Not at all. I just want to make sure we all understand each other clearly. We'll talk about this later, she snapped. Rowan just got home. I need to go. She hung up without saying goodbye. I saved the recording immediately, added it to my evidence file with a timestamp and notes about what had been said. 3 days later, an email arrived, from Rowan's account this time, and not Simone's. The subject line said, visitation terms. I opened it with a sense of dread pooling in my stomach. Inside was a bulleted list, times when I would be allowed to visit, rules I'd have to follow during those visits, a requirement to give them 48 hours advance notice for any visit, and a clause at the bottom stating that any violation of these terms would result in a 1-month suspension of all access to the children. At the very end, please confirm your agreement to these terms in writing. They were formalizing it, creating a contract and making me sign away my rights under the guise of everyone just getting on the same page. I forwarded the entire email to Gerald Pierce without responding to Rowan. Gerald's response came back within an hour. Perfect. Do not respond to them. Let me handle this from here. 2 days later, the letter from Gerald's office was ready for me to review and approve. I sat in his office and read through it carefully. The cease and desist regarding the financial exploitation, documentation of the pattern of tying access to money, the formal request for a visitation schedule that couldn't be changed arbitrarily. And at the bottom, a notice that if they continued to deny access or continued to link it to financial demands, we would be filing for court-ordered visitation rights. I held that envelope in my hands after we'd printed everything and prepared it for mailing. I stared at the certified mail slip that was attached to it. This was the point of no return. Once I mailed this letter, everything would change, and there'd be no going back to the way things had been. I thought about backing down, about just accepting their terms, their rules, and their demands. About staying small, quiet, and grateful for whatever scraps they decided to throw me. Then I thought about Ellie, 8 years old and being taught that love comes with conditions, that family means control, and that grandmothers are something to be managed rather than cherished. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who'd worked double shifts so her son could have new shoes, who'd sat up all night with him when he was sick, who'd sacrificed absolutely everything without ever keeping score or asking for anything in return. That woman deserved better than this. I walked to the post office in Kenmore Square. I handed the envelope to the clerk behind the counter. Certified mail, I said, with signature confirmation. She processed it and gave me the receipt. I walked out into the afternoon sunlight and stood beside my car in the parking lot. I let out a breath that felt like I had been holding it in for 6 solid months. It was done. 48 hours later, Rowan showed up at my house. I saw his truck pull into my driveway at 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening and heard his footsteps coming up the porch, heavy and angry. Then the pounding on my door that made the whole house shake. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the Ring camera app. I hit record. Then I opened the door. He was standing there with his face flushed red and his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. He was holding the letter from Gerald's office in his fist, crumpled up like he'd been squeezing it for the entire drive over. "What the hell is this?" His voice came out low and dangerous. I kept my voice calm and level. "It's a request for reasonable visitation and an end to financial exploitation." "You blindsided us." He stepped closer to me. "You went behind our backs and hired a lawyer and made us look like criminals." "There are no threats in that letter, Rowan. It's just documentation of what has been happening." His voice rose to a shout. "Documentation? You are documenting us like we're criminals? We set boundaries, and you can't handle it. You think you're entitled to our kids just because you're their grandmother. Where did you get these?" His voice came out strangled when I held up the photos of the laptop screen. "She left her laptop open when I was babysitting 3 months ago. I found everything." He stared at the phone screen for another long moment. Then he shoved it back at me. "No, you're twisting it, taking it out of context. Simone keeps notes on everything. That's just how her brain works. She's organized. It doesn't mean..." "Rowan," I said, cutting him off. "Look at the folder name again, Project Dolores. Look at the phases. Look at the financial target." "It's not what it looks like." He was shouting now. "You're so desperate to be the victim that you're making up conspiracies. She was probably just venting, writing out her frustrations. Everyone does that." "Then why is there a folder with 3 other grandmothers' names in it, with status reports saying complete removal achieved?" "I don't know. Maybe she was researching family dynamics. She reads articles about that stuff all the time, about setting healthy boundaries with difficult..." He stopped himself, but too late. "With difficult what?" I asked quietly. "Finish the sentence." His face crumpled. "I didn't mean with difficult mothers-in-law. That's what you were going to say. That's what she's had you believing this whole time, that I'm difficult, that I'm the problem that needs managing. You don't understand." He was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "You don't know what it's like being caught in the middle. She's my wife, the mother of my children. I have to live with her. I have to. You have to choose her over me at every turn?" My voice cracked. "Even when she's extracting $18,000 from me? Even when she's systematically destroying our relationship? Even when she documents it all like a business project? That's not fair. You're twisting everything to make yourself look innocent." "Then explain the money, Rowan." I pulled up my banking app and showed him the highlighted transfers. "Explain why every single payment coincides with getting to see the kids. Explain why access disappears every time I can't pay." He grabbed my phone and scrolled through the transactions. His face went from red to gray. "I thought Simone said you offered. She said you wanted to help, that you insisted. She lied." I said, No, she wouldn't." But his voice had no conviction anymore. I showed him the next photo. The social media messaging strategy. The talking points she'd written for herself about how to frame boundaries and make me look toxic. He read it silently. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. "Show me the folder again," he said finally, "the one with the other names." I pulled it up, watched him read through it, and watched the last pieces of his denial crumble away. "Jesus Christ!" He sank down onto my porch steps. "Jesus Christ, what has she done? She planned to erase me from your lives, and you let her." "I didn't know." He looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. Mom, I swear to God I didn't know about any of this. The folders, the plan, But you knew I was paying for everything. You knew she kept making new rules. You knew access was tied to my behavior. I thought that was just normal. That we were just setting boundaries, protecting our family. From what? From me loving you? He put his head in his hands and broke down completely. His shoulders shook with sobs that sounded like they were being ripped out of his chest. This was my son. The little boy I'd raised alone, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, and he'd chosen to believe I was the problem rather than question his wife's version of reality. What do you want from me? He finally choked out. I want you to admit that you knew something was wrong, that you felt it but ignored it because confronting her was harder than sacrificing me. He flinched like I'd hit him. You're right, he whispered. You're right. I felt it. I knew something was off. I couldn't face it. So I told myself you were just being difficult, that you needed to adjust, that if you just follow the rules, everything would be fine. And now? I asked. He looked at me with devastated eyes. Now I don't know how to fix what I've broken. You start by choosing differently. You start by telling your wife that what she did was wrong. You start by protecting me instead of enabling her. And if she refuses, if she leaves me, then you have to decide what kind of man you want to be. The kind who stands up for what's right, or the kind who sacrifices his mother to keep the peace. He left without another word. Got in his truck and drove away. I stood on my porch with my phone still recording everything, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 18 months. Power. Real power. The kind that comes from finally refusing to be small. 3 days later, my phone rang. Simone this time. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't taking calls anymore unless they were recorded, and she didn't know I was recording, so voicemail was safer. She left a message. She was crying, and her voice kept breaking up between sobs. She said she'd made mistakes. She knew she'd handled things wrong. But we could fix this. We could work through it together. She wanted to make things right between us. I played that message 3 times, not because I believed any of it was genuine, but because I wanted to remember exactly what manipulation sounds like when it's losing control. I called Gerald Pierce and told him about Rowan's visit to my house, about Simone's crying voicemail, and about everything that had happened since we sent the letter. He told me to stay the course. No negotiations outside of formal mediation with lawyers present, no private conversations that weren't documented. Either they agreed to reasonable terms through proper channels, or we'd file for court-ordered visitation rights in court. 2 weeks later, we all sat down in a mediation room together. The mediation took place at a neutral office building in Brookline. Gerald sat on my left. A court-appointed mediator named Dr. Ellen Huang sat at the head of a long conference table. Rowan and Simone sat across from me with their attorney, a woman in her 40s wearing an expensive suit and carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Dr. Wong explained the purpose of the mediation in a calm and professional voice. We were here to establish a visitation framework that would protect everyone's interests and create clear boundaries going forward. She emphasized that this was a voluntary process and that everything discussed here would remain confidential unless we all agreed otherwise. Gerald went first, like we'd planned. He laid everything out methodically and calmly. He presented my banking statements with every transfer to Simone and Rowan highlighted in yellow. He showed the timeline I'd created, documenting every instance when access to my grandchildren was denied or limited. He presented screenshots of the text messages and emails linking money to visitation. Then he showed them the Facebook posts where Simone had been building a public narrative, painting me as the problem. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, all laid out in neat folders and organized chronologically. Then Gerald pulled out the photographs I'd taken from Simone's laptop 3 months earlier. He slid them across the table one by one, letting each one sink in before showing the next. The 12-month erasure plan with phases marked complete and in progress. The financial extraction strategy, showing they'd been working toward a goal of $20,000. The social media messaging strategy document. And finally, the folder labeled Reference Cases, Successful Eliminations, with 3 other grandmothers' names listed. Simone's attorney went visibly pale. She started whispering urgently to Simone, leaning close and speaking fast and low. Simone kept shaking her head and wiping at her eyes. Dr. Huang picked up one of the photographs and studied it carefully. She looked at Simone with an expression I'd never seen on a professional's face before. Something between disgust and deep concern. "Miss Carter," she said quietly, "I need you to tell me if these documents are authentic. Did you create a file called Project Dolores, Phase Implementation Timeline?" Simone opened her mouth, closed it, and looked desperately at her attorney. Simone's attorney held up one hand. "My client isn't going to answer that question at this time." Gerald leaned forward. His voice stayed calm but got harder somehow. "We don't actually need an explanation," he said. "The documents speak for themselves. What we're looking at here is systematic financial exploitation combined with parental alienation. Mrs. Carter's daughter-in-law has been using her grandchildren as leverage to extract money while simultaneously destroying her relationship with those children. And based on that folder of reference cases, this isn't the first time she's done this to someone." He paused and looked directly at Simone. "If we can't reach a reasonable agreement here today, we'll be filing formal complaints with Adult Protective Services for elder financial abuse. We'll also be pursuing grandparent visitation rights through the Massachusetts court system. And when we do that, all of this evidence becomes part of the public record." Simone's attorney asked for a recess. 20 minutes. Dr. Huang agreed, and they left the room. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see them huddled together in the hallway. Simone was crying. Rowan had his head in his hands, and their attorney was talking fast and gesturing sharply. Gerald told me quietly that they were panicking. The evidence was too damning to explain away or dispute. They knew they were cornered, and that they would come back with an offer to try to settle this. When they came back into the mediation room after 20 minutes, something had shifted. Simone's carefully applied makeup was ruined. Black mascara streaked down her cheeks, and her hair was coming loose from its professional bun. But her eyes were wild and cornered. They'd barely sat down when she turned on Rowan. "This is your fault," she hissed at him. "I told you to handle your mother months ago. I told you she was going to be a problem, but you were too weak to." "Simone." Her attorney's voice was sharp. "Stop talking. Right now." "No." Simone's voice rose to a shout. "I'm not staying quiet anymore. I did everything to protect this family. Everything. And now she's making me look like some kind of monster when all I did was set healthy boundaries." Dr. Huang leaned back in her chair, her expression carefully neutral. But I caught something in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or disgust. "Miss Carter," she said quietly, "I think we need to—" "No." Simone's voice was sharp. "We don't need another break. I'm done with breaks." Her attorney grabbed her wrist under the table. I could see her fingers digging in hard. "Simone?" Not another word. But Simone pulled her arm away and turned to face me. Her mascara was smudged. Her carefully styled hair was coming loose. The polished marketing executive was gone. "You want to know why I did it?" Her voice was shaking. "Because you couldn't let go. Every single decision Rowan tried to make, you were there, questioning, suggesting, and making him feel guilty if he didn't check with you first." Rowan's voice came out strangled. "Simone, please. Someone had to protect him from that." She was gripping the edge of the table now. "Someone had to teach him that he didn't owe you his entire life just because you raised him alone. That was your choice, your sacrifice. not his debt to repay forever. Her attorney stood up abruptly. We're taking a recess. Right now, Simone, get up. Why? Simone's voice cracked. So you can tell me again how to spin this. What story to tell? I'm tired of stories. She looked back at me, and for just a second, I saw something raw underneath all that rage. Fear, maybe. Or the dawning realization that she'd gone too far. I'm not going to apologize for protecting my family, she said quietly. But I am done fighting. Her attorney physically pulled her up from her chair and marched her out of the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see them in the hallway. The attorney was talking fast and gesturing sharply. Simone just stood there with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the floor. Rowan put his head in his hands. Dr. Huang looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mrs. Carter, I think we should take 30 minutes. Let everyone collect themselves. The 30-minute recess stretched to 50. When they finally came back, everything had changed. Simone's attorney did all the talking. Simone just sat there with red, swollen eyes, staring at nothing. The proposal was straightforward. Clinical, even. Formal visitation schedule. 2 weekends per month with the children, alternating major holidays, 1 week during summer vacation. All supervised visitation would end immediately. No more financial demands. They'd repay $6,000 over 2 years, $250 monthly, directly deposited into my account. Therapy. Simone would attend weekly sessions with a licensed therapist specializing in control and manipulation patterns. Documentation would be provided quarterly to Gerald's office. Rowan would attend therapy too, separately. All the Facebook posts would be removed within 48 hours, with a public statement acknowledging misuse of social media to discuss private family matters. Not an apology. Simone's attorney was very clear about that distinction. Just an acknowledgement. And Mrs. Carter retains full rights to discuss her experience publicly, the attorney added. No non-disclosure agreement, no restrictions on her speech. If she chooses to share her story, my clients will not interfere in any way. Gerald leaned close to me. This is solid, Dolores. Better than what a judge would likely order. Your call. I looked at Simone. She still wasn't meeting anyone's eyes. Then I looked at Rowan. He was staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. I accept, I said, with one addition. If the quarterly therapy reports show Simone isn't genuinely engaging, if she's performing instead of participating, we renegotiate everything, including the visitation schedule. Simone's head snapped up. I'm not. Her attorney cut her off with a sharp gesture. My client agrees to those terms. Simone's mouth opened, closed. She looked like she wanted to argue, but something stopped her. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe the realization that she had no moves left. Fine, she whispered. Dr. Huang drafted the agreement. We read it carefully, signed it. She notarized every copy. And at 6:03 on a Thursday evening, it was done. I walked out of that building carrying a legal document that gave me back my grandchildren. Gerald walked beside me to my car. You handled that very well, he said, staying firm without being vindictive. That's harder than people think. I don't want vindication, I told him. I just want my grandchildren. That's all I've ever wanted. He nodded, shook my hand, and watched me get in my car. I made it 4 blocks before I had to pull over into a pharmacy parking lot. My hands were shaking too badly to drive. I sat there for 20 minutes with my engine running, just trying to breathe. I had won. So why did my chest still feel so hollow? 3 days later, I pulled up outside their house in Newton for my first scheduled visitation. It was a Saturday at 2 p.m., exactly as the paperwork specified. I'd barely slept the night before. Kept running through scenarios. What if the kids were scared of me now? What if 18 months had been too long? What if I'd won the legal battle but lost them anyway? Rowan answered the door. His eyes were exhausted and red-rimmed. They're in the living room, he said quietly. Then, almost desperately, Mom, I need you to know I'm... Not today, I said gently. Today is about them. He nodded and stepped aside. Ellie and Max were sitting on the couch, not playing and not watching TV, just sitting there, waiting, like they'd been told to wait. When they saw me, Ellie's face lit up, but she didn't move, just glanced quickly at the doorway where Rowan was standing. Max didn't even smile at all. He just watched me with this careful, guarded expression that made my throat tight. "Hi, sweethearts," I said, keeping my voice soft. "I've missed you so much." Ellie stood up slowly, took 2 steps toward me, then stopped and looked back at Rowan. "It's okay," he told her. "You don't have to ask." She walked over and hugged me, but it was different than I remembered. Lighter, briefer, like she was testing whether it was safe. Max stayed on the couch. I knelt down so I could see him better. "Max, you okay, buddy?" His voice came out small and careful. "Are you mad at us?" The words hit me like a fist to the stomach. "No, sweetheart. No, I was never mad at you, not for 1 second. But you went away." His eyes were filling with tears. "You stopped coming over. You missed my birthday." God, how do you explain systematic manipulation to a 5-year-old? "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements," I said carefully. "Big disagreements that take a long time to work through. And sometimes that means we can't see each other for a while, even though we want to. But I never stopped loving you. Not ever." "Mommy said you were sick." His voice cracked. "She said you needed space because being around us made you tired." I felt something crack inside my chest. That's not exactly right," I said slowly. "I wasn't sick. I just had to figure some things out with your mom and dad. But I'm here now, and I'm going to keep being here. Every other Saturday, I'm going to show up. Okay?" He studied my face for a long moment. "Promise?" "I promise." He slid off the couch and walked over slowly. The hug was tentative and uncertain. His little body was stiff against mine, like he was holding himself back. Nothing like the way he used to throw himself at me with complete trust and joy. We spent 2 hours together that afternoon. Not the whole day like I'd imagined. Just 2 quiet, careful hours. Ellie showed me her new dance moves, but kept asking if she was doing them right, like she needed constant reassurance. Max played with his Lego sets, but wouldn't let me help build anything. He kept the pieces close to himself, as though protective. They were polite and sweet, but there was a distance there that hadn't existed before, a wariness in every interaction, like they were waiting for me to disappear again. 6 months after the mediation, I sat in my living room watching Ellie and Max sprawled on the floor with their art supplies. They'd brought over their new markers and were making elaborate drawings across sheets of paper I'd taped together. Max looked up at me suddenly. "Grandma? Yeah, buddy? Are you and Mommy friends now?" I thought about how to answer that. About the therapy reports Gerald forwarded to me every quarter. About Simone at drop-offs, still tense and still careful, but different somehow. Smaller and less armored. Last week, she'd actually asked me how my hip was doing. I'd mentioned the pain in passing during a drop-off 3 months ago, and she had remembered. It wasn't much, but it was something. "We're working on it," I told Max. Sometimes grown-ups have to work really hard to figure out how to get along. It takes a long time. "But you're not mad anymore?" "I'm not mad at you or Ellie. I never was. Your mom and I are figuring out how to be in each other's lives again. It's complicated." He nodded like that made sense, then went back to his drawing. Ellie was watching me with that mature expression she got sometimes. "I'm glad you didn't give up on us, Grandma." My throat went tight. I never would. Ever. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from Rowan. "Therapy is really hard. I'm seeing things I didn't want to see about myself, about what I let happen. I'm sorry it took me this long. I know sorry isn't enough, but I'm trying." I stared at that message for a long time. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to make up for what he'd enabled, for how he'd stood by and watched it happen. But it was a beginning. I texted back, "Keep going, because the work matters more than the apologies." My name is Dolores Carter. I'm 63 years old. I lost $18,000 and 18 months of my life to systematic abuse disguised as healthy boundaries. But I got something back that was worth more than both. 8 months after the mediation, Max brings his favorite toys to my house and leaves them in his room. Ellie asks to bake cookies every visit. They hug me without hesitation when I arrive. It's not what we had before. That easy, uncomplicated love is gone. Maybe forever. But what we have now is real. Built on truth instead of manipulation. On showing up instead of performing. So here's what I need other grandmothers to know. You're not crazy. You're not imagining it. If your instincts are screaming that something is wrong, listen to them. Document everything. And find a lawyer who understands elder abuse. And most importantly, don't stay silent. The pattern continues because nobody talks about it. Because we're taught to be grateful for whatever scraps of access we're given. But we don't have to accept that. On Saturday afternoons, when Ellie and Max are sprawled on my living room floor building forts and laughing, I remember why I fought so hard. Not for victory, not for vindication. For this. For them. For these moments that almost got stolen from us. And nobody gets to take that away from me anymore. You've made it to the end. You walk through the fire with Dolores. But I have to be honest. It breaks my heart when I see people listen to these stories, feel these heavy emotions, and then just walk away. No subscription, no support, just silence. It feels like I'm pouring my soul into a void, working days and nights to bring these voices to life, only to be met with ghost viewers. Please, don't be another ghost. If this story kept you company, don't just take it and leave. You owe it to the story to leave a mark. A subscribe, a super thanks, or even just commenting your city. Tell me where in the world you are listening from. Let me know exactly where my voice is traveling, so I know I'm not alone in this. And if you aren't ready to leave yet, don't. There are 2 more real-life journeys right here on your screen. Pick one. Stay with me a little longer. Don't let the silence win. Until next time.